I heard the alarm before I even reached the bottom step. It was sharp, shrill, and unmistakable. The old federal-grade proximity alert wired straight into my workshop. The kind of sound that crawled under your skin and wouldn't let go. My boots hit the concrete floor hard. I crossed the basement in 3 long strides. And there she was, Karen, hands on her hips like she owned the place. Her cheap perfume mixed with dust and gun oil, making the air itself turn hostile. Standing next to her were 2 men in dark blue polos with HOA security compliance stitched over their guts. One of them had my safe wide open, like it was a lunchbox. The other held up my old black folder, like he was auditioning for a detective drama. "Salt? What the hell are you doing in here?" I barked, voice low but sharp enough to cut through steel. Karen didn't flinch. She just turned her smug face to me, eyes gleaming like a raccoon that found someone else's birthday cake. You left your basement unlocked. It's technically community access, if not secured. That's HOA code. We found documents that suggest you've been operating illegal surveillance. We've called the police. They'll be here shortly. Her voice was steady, polished, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this, planning it. I stepped closer. The taller guard stiffened, hand drifting toward his belt. Not a gun, but probably pepper spray or a radio. I kept my hands at my sides. No sudden moves. Not yet. You broke into a federal class safe. That folder's not yours. Then why is it in your house? She snapped. Let's see what the cops say. I looked at the safe. Open. Empty except for a flashing red diode, blinking slow and steady, like a heartbeat, or a countdown. You see, that wasn't just any safe. That was a trap. Built years ago, back when I did contract work for the Department of Homeland Security. A passive trigger. Open it without the right sequence, and it pings a long-dead protocol. Phalanx. Funny thing about government systems, they never really shut down. They just sleep. Karen had no idea what she'd just done. But I did. I sat down on the workbench slowly, ignoring the shouting upstairs, the buzz of the cops arriving. My eyes stayed on the diode. 1 blink. 2. "Sir, we need you to step outside," a young officer said from the stairs. He didn't sound threatening. Not yet. But the air was shifting, the pressure dropping. I stood, nodded, walked past Karen without another word. Her grin widened. She thought she'd won. Outside, people were gathering, phones out, neighbors peeking over fences. Karen had made a spectacle of it. She was good at that. She lived for it. The HOA had been sniffing around ever since I moved back in 6 months ago. Retired, quiet, not social. That makes you a threat in these parts. The cops asked questions, took statements. Karen handed over the folder with a dramatic flair, like she was donating her personal diary to the Smithsonian. I kept silent. Let them talk. I knew what would come next. Not from them, from the system she'd just kicked awake. By the time they let me back inside, my name was smeared across a dozen community group chats. HOA members whispering about surveillance, hidden files, lawsuits. I was the villain now, the weirdo with secrets. But I'd seen this play before. And I wasn't out of cards. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, lights off, just the hum of the fridge and the creak of wood shifting in the cool air. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and stared at the old rotary phone I kept on the wall. It hadn't rung in years. But I had a feeling, and sure enough, just before midnight, it buzzed. Once, then twice. I lifted the receiver. A voice on the other end said one word: activated. Then silence. I didn't sleep. And Karen? She was about to find out what happens when you poke something you don't understand. The trap had been sprung, but the fallout, that was going to be mine to manage. The next morning, the mailbox was already stuffed with yellow flyers from the Homeowner Association. They didn't waste time. One of them was taped to my truck window. Another was zip-tied to the fence gate. All bold fonts and legal jargon. Notice of noncompliance. Emergency board hearing scheduled. Violation of community trust. I stood in the driveway, sipping burnt coffee from a metal thermos, watching Karen prance around her porch across the street. She wore a robe too tight for her, and slippers that screamed, "Gift from the divorce." She waved at the mailman like a beauty queen, grinning at me from under her plastic sun visor. You'll want to show up to that meeting," she called out. "Unless you'd prefer we decide for you." I didn't answer, just nodded. Let her think she'd rattled me. Inside, I flipped through the folder she'd taken, and the cops had graciously returned. Minus a few pages, of course. I knew what was missing. The trigger files. The ones with names, locations, and buried metadata linked to the dormant phalanx system. They weren't dangerous on their own, but they were breadcrumbs. And Karen had already sniffed one. I called a number I hadn't dialed in 15 years. No one picked up. I didn't expect them to. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since my final black contract expired. I opened the cabinet behind the basement stairs. Inside was a single metal case, still sealed, still cold. I opened it and pulled out an old sand-scoured laptop and a rusted-out signal sniffer. Everything I needed to track what Karen just disturbed. You'd think they'd come for her immediately, but Phalanx doesn't work that way. It waits, observes, lets the subject expose themselves. That night, I drove out past the old water tower to a hill that overlooked the town. From there, I could catch stray signals, bursts of encrypted pings that would only appear if someone had activated the contents of that folder. I watched the lights of the homes below like they were part of a chessboard. One move, just one, and I'd know who she shared it with. Sure enough, around midnight, a shortwave pulse pinged 3 times from a house 3 blocks east of mine. Not Karen's. No. This came from the home of Harold Jenkins, HOA treasurer. Known for his polished shoes and weak spine, he must have taken a copy. I smiled. She was spreading it around, trying to build a case. Back at the house, I left everything untouched. No email, no messages. I let the quiet wrap around me like old flannel. Then I opened my old spiral notebook, the one with the field code. Each ping, each house, each time. I wrote it down. The board meeting was set for Friday. 3 days. In those 3 days, I had to make sure that Karen stepped into the same trap twice, because the first one triggered the system. The second one would trigger me. The following morning brought a knock, not on the door, but on my garage. That meant one thing. Not a neighbor. It was Jack. I opened it slow. Jack stood there in his usual weather-beaten jacket, jeans stained with axle grease, holding a cup of diner coffee in one hand and a half-crushed pack of Camels in the other. "I know you lit up a corpse, didn't you?" he said without hello. Phalanx blinked, I answered. He whistled through his teeth. Didn't think that thing was still wired. Thought they decommissioned all of them. Not this one. He stepped inside, looked around, then whispered like we were back in Kandahar. "You planning to run?" "No," I said. "I'm planning to watch." Jack took a slow drag, exhaled toward the rafters. "Just remember, those kinds of systems don't care who trips the wire. They care who's standing nearest when it blows." I nodded. I knew, and I was already feeling the heat. That night, I went back to the hill, another signal. This time, from Karen's own house. She'd sent something, and someone had received it. I circled that date in red. The day before the board meeting, I made a choice I swore I wouldn't. I went back to the storage unit in Ashwood. It was a 30-minute drive on a cracked back road, the kind of stretch only trucks and regrets ever bothered to travel. I hadn't opened that door in years. The key still hung on the chain I wore around my neck, under my shirt, next to the old scar from a splintered windshield in Basra. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, everything smelled of rubber, rust, and old paper. I pushed aside the tarp and uncovered the old crate stamped Archive C. Inside, burners, portable transmitters, one dusty briefcase. I opened it slowly. Inside, 12 labeled thumb drives, each encrypted. Each mapped to old federal schema no HOA busybody could ever understand. They weren't dangerous alone, but together, they told a story. One Karen didn't know she was starring in. Back home, I didn't sleep. I loaded 2 of the drives into my backup laptop and ran a decoy protocol, letting them look real enough to tempt, but harmless enough not to trip the full switch. The real payloads stayed off-grid, hidden. That night, I slipped a flash drive into an unmarked envelope and left it under Harold Jenkins' doormat, alongside a single line typed on an old receipt, "Ask Karen what Prater means." Then I waited. By noon the next day, my phone buzzed. Not a call, not a text, just a location ping. Jack. He'd traced a digital packet, bouncing from Karen's house to a VPN node in Georgia. That meant one thing. Someone she knew had tried to forward the Phalanx data, probably to someone they thought mattered. But the system doesn't just watch transmissions, it maps behavior. Karen was in deeper than she realized. And Jenkins? He was starting to sweat. By nightfall, his porch lights were off, car gone, mailbox overflowing. She was losing her pawns, but I didn't expect what came next. A knock. Late. 10:43 p.m. I opened the door, hand instinctively hovering near the hidden latch under the console table. It was Sheriff Holloway, gray-haired, wide-shouldered, and carrying more tension than usual in his jaw. "Mike," he said, not asking to come in. Sheriff, Ake, got word you've been distributing encrypted data to HOA board members. That true?" I didn't answer. He continued. "Karen's pressing formal charges. Claims it's part of a coordinated digital intimidation campaign." Her words. I let out a dry chuckle. "She break into any more safes lately?" He didn't smile. "Look, I've known you 20 years, but you need to understand something. The association's been pushing for legal authority over tech infra on private properties. Some council members are actually listening. They want a reason to expand. I stepped onto the porch with him. The air smelled of cut grass and wood smoke. I'm not giving them one, I said. But if they keep poking... He held up a hand. Just make sure when this blows, you're not standing where the shrapnel lands. And with that, he left. I didn't go inside. I sat on the porch till the sky began to lighten. Thinking, measuring. Karen had gone too far. She triggered a legacy defense system she didn't understand. Pulled people into something older and darker than board meetings and lawn ordinances. And now she was reaching for control. The meeting was at noon in the community hall. I didn't plan to speak. I planned to listen. And I planned to end it. The community hall smelled like lemon cleaner and old air conditioning. It was the kind of place where birthday parties and funerals shared the same folding chairs. Half the town was packed inside, buzzing like a hornet's nest. I stood in the back, arms folded, watching Karen hold court at the front table. She wore a navy blazer, 2 sizes too small, and her hair was wound tight like a judge's gavel. She smiled too much. That kind of smile that hides a blade. "Let's begin," she chirped, wrapping her plastic pen against the microphone. "We're here to address an ongoing concern about digital surveillance, unauthorized intelligence gathering, and the preservation of community trust." Whispers rose. I saw Harold Jenkins seated beside her, pale as chalk. His hands wouldn't stop moving, fidgeting with his cuffs, tugging his sleeves. He wouldn't meet my eye. I stayed silent. Karen launched into a performance. Charts, photos, printed screenshots of file names like protocol phalanx doc and restricted access.ext, all taken from my safe, all manipulated to look sinister. She used phrases like data harvesting, internal threat, and civic disruption. The crowd murmured. People shifted uncomfortably. Then she dropped the punch. "We believe Mr. Grayson may have been conducting covert operations from his residence in direct violation of our amended cyber compliance ordinance. We are recommending a vote for immediate community ban and full property reassignment." Ban reassignment. They were making it sound legal, clean. I let the silence stretch until it threatened to snap. Then I stepped forward, slow and calm, the way you move through brush when you know snakes are watching. Karen's smile faltered. I didn't address the board. I turned to the crowd. You all remember when I moved back. 6 months ago. Quiet. Didn't throw parties. Didn't complain about dogs or grass height. Kept to myself. And Karen? She's been knocking on my door every other week. Code this, regulation that. Some chuckles. A few heads nodded. Ah-chang shay. Then, last week, she broke into my basement, opened a Federal Registered safe, took contents she didn't understand, and passed them around like Halloween candy. And now she wants to pretend I'm the threat. Karen stood, voice rising. "You're deflecting. This man is unstable. He's a trained manipulator, former intelligence. He's a danger to..." I cut her off with one word. "I shot that prater." Dead silence. Harold twitched. Karen blinked. A few people looked confused, but someone in the third row, an older man I didn't recognize, went stiff. His eyes locked on me. I said, "Prater," I repeated. "You know what that means, Karen? No? Then maybe you shouldn't have triggered it." Gasps. Whispers. One woman clutched her purse like it might bite. Karen forced a laugh. "This is theater. He's trying to intimidate." The man, from the third row, stood. "Madam Chair, I move to suspend this hearing until the contents of that file are validated by an external authority." Karen froze. He pulled a badge from his coat pocket. It wasn't local. It wasn't even state. The room shifted. Karen sat down, fast. The meeting dissolved into confusion. The crowd buzzed. Arguments sprouted in corners. I left before the smoke cleared. I didn't need to stay. The fuse had been lit. Later that night, Jack pulled up to my place with 2 bags of groceries and a look that said he knew more than he was ready to say. "Hey, you know who that guy was?" he asked, setting down the bags. "Nope," I said, popping a beer. "And I don't want to." Jack exhaled, dropped into a chair. "You just kicked over something older than this town." "I know. Karen's not going to take this lying down. I'm counting on it." Outside, the cicadas screamed, and the sky felt heavier than it should have. I didn't hear from Karen the next day, or the day after. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind that hums in your teeth, like the air before a thunderstorm. She'd been humiliated, sure. Shut down in front of her own fiefdom. That didn't mean she'd stop. Karen didn't lose. She bled in silence, then bit back harder. On the third morning, I found tire tracks through my side field. A fresh rut carved right through the soft clay behind the workshed. Someone had circled the back of the house during the night. No headlights, no knocks. Just the soft signature of someone scouting. Later, the internet dropped. Then power. Briefly. Enough to be annoying. Enough to make me check the breaker. It wasn't tripped. Lines were intact. This wasn't mechanical. This was probing. I stopped using my phone. Dug out the Faraday pouch from the safe room. Jack helped reroute the external antenna through a dummy node. We mounted in the old scarecrow out front. From a distance, it looked like we were still wired. We weren't. That night, Jack stayed over. We split watch in shifts like the old days. At 2:11 a.m., he shook me awake. Motion sensor near the wood line. Someone moving on foot. I grabbed the old thermal scope and zeroed in from the upper bedroom. Single figure. Hoodie. Tall. Male gait. Walking slow. Deliberate. Circling, not approaching. Karen had eyes on me now. But what she didn't know was that I had eyes on her too. Jack had embedded a silent access point in the folder she stole. One of the bait files carried a piggyback script. Basic stuff, but enough. Each time she opened it, we got a snapshot. Metadata, IPs, local logs. I spent the early hours reading her patterns. She wasn't working alone. I didn't recognize the alias. Brindle Asset 4. But it logged in from a VPN out of Arlington. Whoever it was, they were good. Karen had found a leash to tug, and she was pulling hard. By morning, things escalated. A drone, silent, black, low-flying, hovered 30 feet above the back pasture. Jack spotted it first. We didn't shoot it down. We didn't need to. We jammed it. Watched it drift like a confused wasp, then land hard near the creek bed. I disassembled it. No serials, no labels. Military-grade gimbal, though. Someone had upped the game. Karen had moved from bureaucratic harassment to digital warfare. She'd gone beyond HOA bylaws, beyond petty fines and neighborhood votes. She was working with someone who knew systems, and they were treating this like a hostile extraction. It meant she'd gotten spooked, or greedy, probably both, but greed is predictable. That afternoon, I made my move. I mailed a package to Harold Jenkins. No note. Just a flash drive labeled HOA Financials 2012-2017. The real contents? A stripped-down audit trail I'd saved during my own review months back. Nothing illegal, just unethical, shady contracts, duplicate billing, Karen's name on too many sign-offs. I didn't expect Harold to confront her. I expected him to panic, and panic he did. By nightfall, Karen's porch lights were blazing, her SUV gone. 2 black sedans parked out front. I watched from the barn loft with binoculars, the hay prickling at my neck. One man exited the house an hour later, talked into a phone. No badge, no uniform, but the way he stood said ex-military. Eyes always scanning. Karen had traded politics for muscle, and I was running out of time. The 6th night, the air felt wrong. Still. Dense. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. I was on edge. So was Jack. He didn't say much, just sat in the barn, cleaning an old 308 like it was Sunday ritual. He wasn't planning to use it. We weren't there yet. But in the silence between barn beams and cicada noise, it meant something. Karen had gone dark. No more movement from her house. The porch stayed unlit. No cars. No jogs in the morning. No HOA newsletters dropped on doorsteps. She'd vanished, but not out of fear. She was preparing. The first hit came at 3:08 a.m. The workshop window shattered. Quick, sharp, like a single knuckle rap from the night itself. We were downstairs in seconds. But whoever it was, fast. No prints, no vehicle tracks, just a single message, etched into the garage door in red spray. Stop or we bury it all. Subtle. By morning, the neighborhood buzzed. Word had gotten out that someone had vandalized the Grayson place. Karen, of course, wasn't answering questions, but Harold was, nervously, eagerly. He'd suddenly found a backbone, probably under pressure. He spoke to a few neighbors over coffee, acting casual but letting details leak. That I was ex-intelligence, that I had dangerous files, that the feds were circling. The story was being flipped. Jack watched from the porch with narrowed eyes. They're trying to isolate you. I nodded. Classic play. Cast the threat as the threat. That afternoon, I took a drive. Not far. Just into the old orchard to the west of town. There, under a false floorboard in the pump shed, was a backup I hadn't touched since 2011. A final contingency. Time-stamped archives, financial overlays, voice logs. Karen had barely scratched the surface of the archive. I took one drive. Just one. Labeled it plain, Legal Compliance Review. Dropped it in the mail, not to the sheriff, to the regional property tax assessor. See, Karen's power came from HOA legal status. But that status rested on zoning, permits, and one very specific clause. 42C. That clause said, no community with more than 25% undeclared shared land could impose regulatory fines without dual audit. Karen had never filed that audit. Not once. If the office ran the numbers, her HOA authority would collapse like a drunk on a porch swing. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to cut her roots. That night, Jack asked me a question I hadn't been ready for. What if it doesn't work? I looked at him, at the chipped enamel mug in his hand, at the scar across his knuckles, at the quiet loyalty in his voice. Then we push harder, I said. He shook his head. No. I mean, what if they come anyway? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked the perimeter, checked the traps, reset the perimeter beacons, looked out over the pasture where I used to run drills with my dog, back when the field was just grass and freedom. Now it was theater, a place for smoke and shadows, and I had to make sure the next act belonged to me, because the curtain was rising. And Karen? She was getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. It started with a humming. Not the kind you notice right away, but the kind that creeps under your skin. An unnatural vibration, like a far-off engine spinning where nothing should be. By the time I realized it was coming from underground, it was already too late. I stepped into the basement and felt it. The air was wrong, dense, electric. The diode on the wall safe, the one Karen had tripped, was no longer blinking. It was glowing, solid red, like a wound that refused to clot. I didn't touch it. I knew better. Jack came down behind me, breath held. Is that what I think it is? Dead man switch, I said quietly. He didn't ask why I'd wired a Cold War protocol into a ranch basement. He didn't need to. We both knew. Sometimes you build traps not for enemies, but for time itself. Just in case. Only one way to shut it down. Now. I opened the breaker panel behind the water heater, flicked a hidden latch. Inside was a panel labeled Primary Control. I keyed in the code. Nothing happened, which meant someone else had already tried. Karen, or her new friends. Upstairs, the dog we didn't own barked. Short, panicked, then silence. I reached for my belt. The breach came through the back door. Silent entry. Coordinated. 2 men, maybe 3. No HOA polos this time. These weren't bureaucrats. These were contractors. The kind that wore soft shoes and hard eyes. We didn't fight. We didn't need to. We let the trap play. Jack moved first, threw a breaker to kill the lights. Basement flooded with emergency red. I hit the silent alarm hidden under the stair rail. Not for police, for phalanx. Upstairs, the intruders paused. One muttered something, then footsteps. Heavy, fast, retreating. The diode blinked once, then green. We waited. Nothing. Outside, a shadow moved across the upper pasture. Not running, walking. Deliberate. Karen. She came alone. Arms crossed. Hair down. No SUV. Just her and that same look she always wore. The one that said rules were made for people without teeth. You went too far, she said. I didn't answer. You think you're the only one who knows how to leverage systems. I know people too. Still, I said nothing. She walked closer. Slow. They were willing to offer you an off-ramp. I convinced them not to. You brought this on yourself. That was when the black SUV crested the hill. Not hers, not ours. It stopped. 2 figures stepped out. One held a tablet. The other held a folder. Karen turned, froze, recognized them. Then she looked at me. What did you do? She whispered. I finally spoke. You triggered a system designed to bait traders. Then you kept digging. The deeper you went, the more it watched. And the more it watched, the less I had to do. The man with the folder approached her, spoke low. She stumbled back. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. The other man showed her something on the tablet. She went pale. Not arrested. Not cuffed. Just dismissed. Like a number scrubbed from a ledger. The SUV turned. Left. Karen stood there, trembling. Unsure if she'd just been fired, ruined, or erased. And I just closed the barn door. Let the silence eat the rest. The days that followed were quiet. In the way winter sometimes is. Still on the surface, but full of weight. Like snow clouds that haven't broken yet. Karen didn't return. Her house stayed dark. Blinds drawn. Mail piled up in the box like fallen soldiers. Word drifted through the neighborhood in fragments. Some said she left town. Others claimed she'd been transferred somewhere. No one said who took her. No one wanted to know. The HOA meetings were canceled. Twice. Harold Jenkins stepped down from his position, citing medical stress. No replacement was named. The monthly newsletter went out without a signature. Just blank space where Karen's message used to be. The ink was smudged. Literally. And me? I mowed the lawn, repaired the garage window, painted over the red spray on the door with a flat barn gray. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted my house back. Not the files, not the surveillance. Just the quiet, the porch, the evening hum of insects that didn't carry meaning. Jack stayed another week. We didn't talk much, just sat on the porch, sipping bad coffee, watching shadows stretch long over the hills. One morning he packed up and said, "You bought yourself time." I asked, "What about them?" He gave a half shrug. "They're never really gone. Just busy elsewhere. For now." Then he was gone too. I didn't mind. Solitude had always been my oxygen, but something lingered. The diode in the basement no longer blinked. But I checked it every morning. Ritual. Like touching a scar to remind yourself it healed wrong for a reason. About a week later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, "Your containment has been accepted. System reset pending. Do not initiate re-entry unless prompted." At the bottom, a single character, not a signature. Just a glyph, like a Roman numeral crossed with an arrowhead. I burned it, but the smell stayed in my nose for hours. The town went on. Summer approached. Kids rode bikes. Someone repainted the park bench near the bakery. The community slowly forgot, but I didn't. Because when you've lived under systems like this, you know the truth. Nothing ends. It just waits. That was the deal I made when I wired that safe all those years ago. A fuse in the ground, tied not to explosives, but to history. Karen lit it, and now she's gone. But the ash still settles. I stopped checking the diode after a month, but I left the panel open, just in case the world decided to knock again. It was almost dusk when I saw her again. Not Karen, someone else. She pulled up in a dusty sedan. Tinted windows, rental plates. Young, maybe early 30s. Sharp posture, no makeup, eyes like polished steel. The kind of person you don't notice until she's the only one left in the room. She didn't get out right away. Just sat behind the wheel, watching. Then, as if the scene had played out in her head a dozen times, she stepped onto the gravel drive and approached the porch. No clipboard, no badge. Just a plain envelope and a question already forming in her mouth. You're Michael Grayson. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. She held out the envelope. This is yours. I didn't take it. What is it? She hesitated. Just long enough to mean something. Closure. That word always tasted like rust. She left the envelope on the porch rail and walked back to the car. No goodbyes. No threats. No instructions. I waited until she was gone before picking it up. Inside. Photographs. Karen. Not recent. Surveillance. Airport terminal. Then another in a hotel lobby. Looking over her shoulder. One final shot. Her in an empty room. Seated at a metal table. Eyes down. Alone. No marks, no timestamp. Just a sentence typed on the back of the final photo. Asset 3 classified. Containment successful. That night, I built a fire in the pit out back. Tossed the photos in one by one, watching each curl into itself before disintegrating. But the last one, the one with her at the table, I held on to that longer. I wasn't angry. I wasn't relieved. Mostly, I was tired, because Karen wasn't the worst of it. She was just the one who got close enough to trigger it. To make me remember who I used to be, and what I once built. She wasn't a villain. Just curious, ambitious, and too damn sure of her own immunity. But systems don't forgive ignorance, and they don't forget either. Weeks passed. Summer bled into August. The heat sank deep into the soil. Trees dried at the edges. Life returned. In pieces. Jack called from Colorado. The sheriff came by with pies from his wife, never asked a single question. A neighbor boy dropped a baseball over the fence, asked sheepishly if he could fetch it. I said yes. That was the first time I'd spoken to someone from this town in nearly a month. Felt good. Felt strange. One morning, I sat on the porch with coffee and realized I hadn't checked the basement diode in over 3 weeks. Didn't feel the need to. That was when I knew it was really over. Not the system. Not the possibility. Just the war. Karen was gone. The Homeowner Association's grip, broken. And me? I was just an old man on a porch again. Which frankly was all I ever wanted to be. And all I'd fought to keep. Funny how it took the worst parts of myself to protect the quietest ones. But that's how peace works sometimes. It doesn't come from asking. It comes from surviving long enough to deserve it.